On today's show, Kevin Porter Jr. arrested on charges of domestic violence in New York City early Monday morning. The facts of the evidence that we know so far, expected outcomes from this situation, Rockets' impact on and off the court, and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
Throw it up to Jalen Green.
Sengun here in the short row. Oh my, that's the no look.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah!
Look at Tari, Eason.
Here comes Tari. No!
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
The Houston Rockets select Thompson and Cam Whitmore.
One thing I have never done is not made the playoffs, and so we want to take that step here as well.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Some pretty heavy stuff to talk about on today's show, with Kevin Porter Jr. being arrested on charges of domestic violence in New York City. The whole situation is kind of surreal to still be processing. He was arrested early Monday morning, and news was eventually leaked and slowly hit the internet, and then it just exploded and it was everywhere Monday afternoon. We actually, on today's show, will unpack the facts and the evidence that we know so far about the situation, the expected outcomes of this situation with KPJ, the Rockets' impact both on and off the court, and plenty more. We were actually at Toyota Center Monday morning for a 9/11 luncheon, a 9/11 first responders luncheon that the Rockets were throwing in honor of first responders in the greater Houston area. And we had a media availability with General Manager Rafael Stone and President Gretchen Shear, and seemingly 15, 20 minutes after their availabilities had concluded was when the news about Kevin Porter Jr. broke and kind of hit the airwaves and really started gathering steam. Let's go ahead and we'll present what we know so far from the situation and kind of then unpack from there expected outcomes and how this situation should see itself playing out. So first, NBA player Kevin Porter Jr. pleaded not guilty Tuesday to assaulting his girlfriend after he was arrested in Manhattan on Monday. The Houston Rockets guard was released on a $75,000 cash bail. The judge imposed a temporary order of protection. Porter, 23, is charged with felony assault and strangulation. According to the criminal complaint, Porter's 26-year-old girlfriend, former WNBA player Kizra Gondrezick, also goddaughter of John Lucas, longtime Houston Rockets assistant coach and staple of the basketball community, told police that he struck her repeatedly about the face with a closed fist, causing a laceration above her right eye and bruising and substantial pain to her face at the Millennium Hilton. Gondrezick said Porter applied pressure to her neck by forcefully squeezing it, causing her to experience difficulty breathing, redness and bruising to her neck, and substantial pain, the complaint said. Prosecutors said Porter didn't stop until Gondrezick ran out into the hallway covered in blood. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors said she suffered a fractured vertebrae in her neck, according to a criminal complaint. Assistant Manhattan District Attorney Myra Kurzer said Porter has a history of abusing Gondrezick, including an incident in which he rammed his car into hers. Gondrezick, the fourth pick in the 2021 NBA draft, played one season for the Indiana Fever and is currently a free agent. She is also an actress and model. In November 2020, while playing for the Cavaliers, Porter was arrested after police said they found a loaded handgun and marijuana in his car after a single vehicle crash. Porter claimed he didn't know the gun was there, and his charges were eventually dismissed. Porter, a 2019 first-round draft pick from USC, was traded from Cleveland to Houston a few months later after he reportedly blew up at the Cavaliers' general manager after finding out his locker had been moved to make room for a newly acquired player. In April 2021, the NBA fined Porter $50,000 for violating the league's COVID-19 health and safety rules by visiting a Miami strip club, the booby trap incident, as you'll remember. In January 2022, the Rockets suspended Porter for a game after then-coach Stephen Silas said the player had a spirited debate and lost his temper at halftime. So the halftime blow-up from Kevin Porter Jr. The Rockets said they are looking into the investigation, but at this point had no further comment. Porter's due back in court on October 16th. The Rockets are also scheduled to play a preseason game that day in San Antonio, with their regular season tipping off about 2 weeks after that. So, in addition to this updated article and timeline of events, we also know that the arrest took place at 6:45 a.m. Monday morning in New York, and some of the preliminary articles and evidence suggested that KPJ and Kisra had gotten into an argument. She locked herself in the hotel room, and Kevin then went downstairs and got hotel security to let him into the room. And then that is when everything else took place, the alleged domestic violence report. Now, this is an overwhelming amount of evidence to have stacked against him, and will still operate under the assumption, not necessarily innocent until proven guilty, although that's how things work here. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence. Apparently, there might even be a witness, possibly one of the hotel staff members who let Kevin back into the room. And then it's hard to imagine that if Kisra went back out into the hallway covered in blood, there probably has to be hotel security footage available that is going to be pretty damning in this entire situation. This is a really, really messed up situation. And first and foremost, it's really important to remember that before any consequences for Kevin Porter Jr., before any impact on the Rockets as an organization or, as a basketball team, whatever, there's a victim here. And it is so terrible what Kisra has gone through in this situation, and the ways in which people are discussing the situation online has been really, frankly, gross and disappointing to see, honestly. I wish her all the best. I can't imagine what going through this situation feels like, and hopefully she's able to find justice, especially as the article alludes that there is potentially a history of issues between KPJ and Kisra, and that only makes the situation all that much worse because how many people knew about anything going on between those two? Because, again, this is a person who has ties to John Lucas, a prominent member of the Houston Rockets organization, and you have to imagine that people close to both Kevin and Kisra had to have known that there were potentially other issues going on between these two and that this isn't necessarily the first incident that's happened. It's potentially just the first one that has escalated to such a point that authorities had to get involved, and the ramifications are going to be incredibly steep here. Kevin Porter Jr. is not only at risk of losing his spot with the Houston Rockets and losing his role with this team and potentially losing his contract, he's at risk of his career being completely derailed by this incident. So coming up, want to get into the expected outcomes of this situation, how things should be handled moving forward, why we haven't seen the Rockets make any immediate moves regarding the situation by way of cutting or waiving Kevin Porter Jr., aside from just the preliminary statement that they've issued, as well as how it does impact the Rockets from a basketball perspective. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. Look, groceries are already so incredibly expensive. Why not earn a little bit more cash back on the money that you're already shelling out for groceries? That's where Ibotta can help you. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you are purchasing. Just link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that simple. Other apps give you points that kind of don't really amount to much, right? With Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or even gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and so many more. Right now, Ibotta is giving our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKED. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, as we look at this situation involving Kevin Porter Jr. and the outcomes and the expected outcomes, first off, these are currently allegations. I will say, though, based on the reporting and the language being used and the evidence presented so far, things are not looking great. And as far as domestic violence cases go, this might be one of the worst ones that I've seen or read about in a long time. That's not to say that that any one case of domestic violence is worse than another. They're all bad, and there should be an absolute zero tolerance policy in the NBA towards domestic violence. And as the Rockets and the NBA conduct their formal investigations, my expected outcome for this situation is that Kevin Porter Jr. will no longer be a member of the Houston Rockets, and that is absolutely the path forward that the Rockets should take. There needs to be a zero tolerance policy for this type of behavior. And it's not only just that, it's the severity of this situation could lead to significant jail time for Kevin Porter Jr. That's a distinct possibility at this point with how severe the reporting makes the situation sound. Now, for Kevin Porter Jr. and his future, Adrian Wojnarowski was discussing this situation and basically shared that the league has launched an investigation and they will handle it in the near term. Now, my understanding of the situation, and Adrian shared this in his reporting, the bylaws of the NBA prevent the Houston Rockets from handling this at all. So the Rockets' hands are currently tied. All they can do is conduct their own investigation simultaneously with the NBA, but they cannot unilaterally make any decisions. So while there are plenty of Rockets fans, NBA fans, and people online forming, gathering the pitchforks and forming a mob and demanding justice, and rightfully so, I get that, the Rockets literally cannot do anything currently. The investigation has to be conducted, and the NBA handles all matters of this severity, right? When it comes to domestic violence, especially, the NBA handles situations like this. So the Rockets can't do anything. However, Adam Silver could put Kevin Porter Jr. on administrative leave if he so desired, and the Rockets themselves can also ask Kevin Porter Jr. to stay away from the team while they are conducting said investigation. Now, Wojnarowski goes on to say, there's no question that Kevin Porter Jr.'s future, not just with the Rockets, but in the NBA, is very much in peril. These are extremely serious allegations. Going back a number of years to USC, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Houston Rockets, problems have followed him. Cavaliers drafted him late in the first round and essentially gave up on him. Then you look at his contract in Houston, it was a very team-friendly deal, non-guaranteed money after the first year. One of the frustrating elements of this situation is it's not exactly surprising. And that's really unfortunate because Kevin is unfortunately a guy who has had problems follow him for a great portion of his life, right? He had issues at USC. He had issues with the Cavaliers. He even had issues here in Houston. He had his halftime blow up against John Lucas. He's had issues, responding to and following what the coaching staff wants out of him. And there have even been issues that have been kind of swept under the rug. There was one story, one moment that was shared with me a while back that I didn't feel comfortable at the time discussing, but given the gravity of the current situation, there was a team outing for the Houston Rockets, and they were at a club apparently, and this was not this past season, but the previous season. And they were out at a club apparently, and there was a disagreement, I guess, with the DJ in the club, and KPJ took the laptop of said DJ and smashed it on the floor, just completely destroyed it. And started tearing the place up, and the Rockets, they immediately got him out of there very, very quickly. And that's only one situation. And while I understand, and while I also appreciate how Kevin was given a second chance by the Rockets organization, and how it did look like he was trying to be the best version of himself, and while it looked like, at least on the outside looking in, that Kisra, his partner, was good for his mental health, and that those two were genuinely loving and supporting of each other, and that he kind of was trying to have his head, screwed on his shoulders the right way, I can only imagine that there are or have been other situations behind the scenes that haven't seen the light of day, that there are issues behind the scenes. And we go back to the times where we've seen national media guys discussing what's wrong with Houston. We go back to Chris Mannix and him highlighting that Kevin Porter Jr. was one of the culture issues in Houston. We go back to Jonathan Givony, unprompted, kind of throwing Kevin Porter Jr. at the time, it seemed throwing Kevin Porter Jr. under the bus, but pointing, again, very unprompted, highlighting the fact that Kevin Porter Jr. was a culture issue in Houston. And hindsight being 2020, you go back and you see what those guys were saying, and other guys too. It's not just those two. I mean, so many different storylines, narratives, talking heads, and it's because these guys hear things. And it might be word of mouth. It might be, friend of a friend or colleague of a colleague, whatever. But they hear things. And while they might not have concrete evidence or something to report, that's just kind of how the NBA works, is maybe you hear a whisper here and there, or you hear, a player says this or drops a sideways comment about that. And I paint that picture to say that I wish that this situation, I wish I could say I was surprised about how this situation came to light, but I'm just not, because there is a history that has followed Kevin Porter Jr. And at the end of the day, this isn't his first offense. This isn't even his second offense. This isn't even his third. This is like the fifth or sixth or seventh time that something off the court, that he has gotten into a situation, an incident that has been his own doing. And I'm a firm believer in second chances. I get that. And sometimes you just make a bad decision. You are in a bad way. I get that. But the Rockets extended an olive branch to Kevin Porter Jr. They gave him a lifeline when nobody else was going to. They brought him into the organization, and they gave him every bit of support, every support system that they possibly could, and it still didn't work. And so because of that, I think that his time in Houston is likely coming to an end. And by the extension of that, I think his time in the NBA is likely coming to an end, because the Rockets were the last organization that was going to give him a chance. And we can unpack in the future how the Rockets giving KPJ a chance may have jeopardized the future of this organization. In fact, I want to hit on that in just a moment. But it's tough to imagine any other NBA team being willing to step out and give him yet another chance after this latest incident. So KPJ's career could very well be over because of this situation. Coming up, want to get into some of the impacts for your Houston Rockets about this Kevin Porter Jr. situation on the eve of the 2023-2024 season, how we can expect some of this to play out. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, looking at things from a Rockets perspective, and I also want to preface by saying that, this situation is so severe, so heavy. I don't want to come across as insensitive to want to be jumping into how this impacts the Rockets. I made this point earlier, and I want to reiterate it. There is a victim here, and I truly wish Kisra all the best moving forward, and I truly hope that she receives whatever justice she deems worthy for this entire ordeal that she's gone through. But this is a Rockets basketball podcast, and I feel like we've presented the evidence that we have so far and trying to tackle this situation from all angles. And that does include how it impacts the Houston Rockets as a basketball organization. So I will say that one of the potentially damning elements of this whole Kevin Porter Jr. saga, KPJ has been one of the most polarizing elements of Houston Rockets basketball for the past 2.5 years, because he was a guy with a very troubled past that the Rockets brought in, were internally very high on, and essentially gave the keys of the organization to. And that is going to be a pretty terrible look down the line. And that's going to be something that Rafael Stone and the current Rockets regime have to own up to. The fact that they gave KPJ the keys, they sacrificed very important developmental run to Kevin Porter Jr. rather than prioritizing their draft picks during this rebuilding era. Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari, Eason, guys that could have easily been made focal points of what they were trying to achieve. And instead, they spent 2.5 seasons trying to turn Kevin Porter Jr. into, a mini James Harden, and tried to make him the point guard of the team, and saddling him with Steven Silas, and icing John Wall, a guy who would have, could have easily brought a veteran edge and been potentially a really great part of developing Jalen Green into the player that the Rockets hoped he could become. And it doesn't just stop there. It also goes back to the 2021 NBA draft, where the Rockets were faced with the decision of Jalen Green versus Evan Mobley. And there were reports that Evan Mobley's father, a coach at USC, did not want Evan Mobley going to Houston, and that Evan Mobley declined to work out for the Rockets and everything because he didn't want Evan Mobley anywhere near Kevin Porter Jr. So it's very possible that impacted and played a part. Kevin Porter Jr. being in a Rockets jersey might have impacted the Rockets draft decision ultimately. And not only that, you also drafted Jalen Green, a guy who plays the exact same position as Kevin Porter Jr. It's all very perplexing. It's all very confusing. And the amount of impact that KPJ has had on this organization, the decision-making and the decision-makers at play kind of bending over backwards to cater to him, to build an offense around him, to, cater to his every beck and whim, to walk on eggshells around him organizationally, all of it is very concerning. And we may look back on this a couple years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. If Evan Mobley is a future, superstar and Jalen Green turns out to just be like a really good B-tier star or something, if there's a distinct gap between those two players, then that's another thing that this organization is going to have to own up for down the line. And it's another impact, a side effect, if you will, of the Kevin Porter Jr. experiment. Not only the fact that, running Kevin Porter Jr. at point guard for this last 2.5 years has probably stalled some of the developmental run for guys like Jalen and Sengun and Jabari, rather than having a legitimate NBA point guard setting the table for these other young players. It's a lot to process. It's a lot to wrap your head around regarding this whole situation and how it relates back to the Rockets. I will say that Kevin Porter Jr. not being a part of this team this upcoming season, even though I was cautiously optimistic about his potential role with the Rockets this season and playing for Ime Udoka and being put back into his natural position of a dynamic scoring guard, potential sixth man of the year off the bench for the Rockets, I was excited to see what he was going to be able to achieve. And I doubt we get a chance to see that now. The Rockets were kind of up against a wall of not having enough minutes to go around for all of the players that they wanted to get legitimate rotation minutes this season. And likely the first victim of that minutes crunch was going to be Cam Whitmore, unless he just completely outplayed Jae'Sean Tate in training camp. And so now there will be more minutes and more run for Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore, likely right out of the gate. Whereas we were probably looking at a world where Amen Thompson might have been getting only 18, 20 minutes a night, and Cam Whitmore might not have even been getting any part of the rotation, at least for the early part of the basketball season. Now we're looking at a world where you expect Cam Whitmore to probably slot into that final, 9th, 10th spot in the rotation, and he'll probably be the guy getting the fewest amount of minutes of anybody in the rotation on a regular occurrence, or on a regular basis, I should say. But now he probably gets rotation minutes out of the gate. And it also opens up a little bit more flexibility for the guard rotation for the Rockets, with Amen Thompson being able to shoulder some extra minutes and some more possibilities now between Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, and Fred VanVleet, and that trio of guards, because any two of those three can play alongside each other. You can have Amen play alongside Fred VanVleet and guard the opposing team's two guards, but run the offense offensively with Fred VanVleet playing off ball. You can even run essentially a 3-guard lineup with those guys, with Fred, Jalen, and Amen Thompson out there, and Amen can just guard whoever the small forward is on the other team, and he can handle the ball offensively, and you can have Jalen and Fred both playing off ball to him. There are endless possibilities that the Rockets can experiment with now that they might not have been afforded with Kevin Porter Jr. in the rotation. Now, a downside is, from a basketball perspective, Kevin Porter Jr. was the Rockets' best shooter. He was going to be probably their best three-point shooter, and especially changing his role to what was likely going to be a more off-ball centric role, they were probably going to really try and prioritize his three-point shooting, especially to help Amen Thompson space the floor, and they don't have that luxury now, or they likely won't have that luxury in the rotation. So shooting is always at a premium in the NBA, and losing, or likely losing, your best shooter is going to have some, adverse side effects as far as how the Rockets look spacing wise, what they're able to achieve at certain points. But the big takeaway from all this, and one more thing to consider as far as just the Rockets' impact, is Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green have been incredibly close since Jalen was drafted, right? They've been, since even before Jalen was drafted, right? Those two guys were close. They were hitting each other up on social media. They've referred to each other as brother, twin, all of that. And I made this point back when the Rockets traded away KJ Martin and Josh Christopher. And there's a level of growing up that I feel like Jalen Green has to still do as a person and as an NBA player and as the potential face of this Rockets organization. And Kevin Porter Jr. was the one final holdover from kind of the Steven Silas era and that almost safety net kind of cushion for Jalen Green. And now Jalen is going to probably have to experience life post Kevin Porter Jr. He's not going to have his twin around, likely. And that's going to force him to have to grow up a little bit more. And how he responds to this situation will tell us a lot about Jalen Green. So obviously, this story is far from being over. There's still so much more that has to come out, and we'll keep you posted for everything, all updates about this situation moving forward right here at Locked On Rockets. A bit of a heavy episode today, and I apologize for that. A somber episode, if you will. But as always, thank you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.